There are cases in this world that neither science nor medicine can explain. Few people would have thought that an experienced medical examiner who, like many other doctors, should be a materialist, would suddenly tell something that would make even skeptics' hair stand on end. Today I'm going to tell you about America's most compassionate coroner, Dr. Janice Carol Amatuzio, a specialist in forensic pathology. Why the most compassionate? For example, because after the autopsy, Janice calls the relatives of the deceased to tell them the details and express her condolences. This is completely atypical behavior for a forensic pathologist. Kindness and compassion are crucial. I must not only establish the truth, but also express my sympathy to my loved ones. You just need to be there and listen. And then they'll be able to heal from grief and come back to life, says Dr. Janice. Before turning to the truly incredible things that Janice encountered while working as a pathologist, I want to say a few words about her biography. Janice was born in 1950 in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. Her father was a famous therapist. Listening to his stories, young Janice decided on her profession long before graduating from high school. She became a student at the University of Minnesota Department of General Medicine. When it came time to choose a narrow specialty, the girl wanted to become a pathologist. And after graduation, she came to work in a forensic laboratory. Everyone who has worked with Dr. Janice notes her amazing cheerfulness and positive thinking. After all, some of her colleagues become callous because of the nature of such work. In addition, she did not dismiss the amazing cases that she witnessed in her line of duty. Unlike many doctors, Janice believed in the supernatural, maybe because she had her own unusual experiences in early childhood. When the girl woke up in the morning, she saw the sunlight swirling around the room, and out of that warm, soft light, the figures of two glowing horses appeared. They circled and disappeared, bowing to her in farewell. Janice still believes that this is how her spiritual mentors met her. Janice has been collecting supernatural stories for years. Relatives, friends, patients who had suffered clinical death, police officers, priests, and medical colleagues of various specialties shared real stories with her. She has included them in her books, Forever Hours, Real Stories of Immortality and Living from a Forensic Pathologist and Beyond Knowing, Mysteries and Messages of Death and Life from a Forensic Pathologist. She holds meetings with readers all over the country. Now, let's lift the veil of secrecy and get acquainted with the incredible cases from her medical practice. This is the very first story Janice heard back when she was an intern. This story is about a man who has experienced clinical death. One patient said that they started putting an IV drip on him. He became allergic to the injected medication and died. The man described in detail how he got out of his body and watched the resuscitation from the side. This can be heard from many who have experienced near-death experiences. But then something amazing happened. At the same moment, the guy in the next bed went into cardiac arrest. He left his body and was very surprised to see another spiritual entity in the ward. The two of them looked at the commotion in the ward. But when they realized that they could not interact with the living, they faced the question of what to do next. As in many similar cases, they both had a choice: to stay in our world or to move on to another world. That other guy didn't want to return to his physical body. It was an amazing experience. There was no fear. Everything seemed completely natural. The incident has completely changed the man's life. Now he has no fear of death. He is sure that after death we continue to live in another world. Now this person can hear people's thoughts. This happened for the first time during intensive care. He said that he had caught the nurse's thoughts. When the second patient went into cardiac arrest, she was angry. It wasn't because she didn't like her job. The reason was that she had a date scheduled after her shift and she didn't want to stay late. And here's the story from Janice herself. Gregory Bear was 19 years old. It was a beautiful hot autumn evening. He was driving home. It is unknown for what reason he was distracted from driving and crashed into the side of a semi-trailer tractor. His car ended up right under the truck and half of his head was practically blown off. I did the autopsy on the young man. Greg's mother was a senior nurse in the therapy department at a local hospital. She called me because she had some questions. "Doctor, is there any chance that he was conscious?" I replied, "Mary, no, he couldn't have been conscious with such injuries. The paramedics, the driver of the truck he crashed into, no one saw him conscious. Judging by the injuries, your son died instantly. It happened around 2 a.m. The next day, a deputy sheriff came into my office. I just got a call from a woman named Sheila. She was Greg's babysitter when he was 2 years old, and she hasn't seen him since. She said that last night she dreamed of the same baby she looked after 17 years ago. He was standing by her bed and was agitated and confused. Sheila hugged him and he disappeared. Suddenly, the bedroom was flooded with bright light and the boy appeared again. This time, he was changing rapidly, growing up, and a minute later, Sheila saw a young man standing at the foot of the bed. He asked, "Sheila, tell my parents that I love them. Tell them that I'm okay. I'm so happy, and there are so many good people here. Oh, and tell Mom that I'm with Ellie right now." I decided to dial Mary Bear's number and tell her the whole story. We were silent for a long time, and then I asked who Ellie was talking about. My hair stood on end when I heard the answer. "This is my mother. She died 2 years before Greg was born." He had never even heard of her. "You know, Janice, my grief hasn't gone away, but it's gotten easier. Now I know for sure that I will see my son again. I just have to wait." And this is a story about a man who died sitting in a rocking chair in front of the TV. The autopsy revealed a tumor in the heart. His wife, Julie, said that on the first night after her husband's death, she was completely devastated. She was sitting in his favorite chair, feeling his arms around her. Then she went to bed and cried herself to sleep. She had previously closed the bedroom door so that the children would not hear her sobbing. At 4 a.m., she was awakened by footsteps in the hallway, sat up in bed and looked at the door. She thought it was her 14-year-old son, but her husband came in through the door. Waves of light emanated from him. He came over, put his hand on her shoulder, and told her that he loved her very much. She should stop grieving, at least not as much as she is now. He said that he was fine, that he would always be by her side. She woke up the next morning feeling sad. The pain of loss has not disappeared, but it has dulled. It turns out that not only people can return to their loved ones after death. The following story will be about the devoted Labrador Buddy, told on behalf of his mistress. When my mother-in-law fell and broke her hip, she underwent surgery. She moved into our house for the duration of her recovery. It was an unusually cold winter. Grandma didn't like our old dog too much at first, but later they became friends. While changing the bedclothes on my mother-in-law's bed, I noticed the silky black fur. It turned out that Buddy climbed into bed at night and warmed her with his warmth. By the beginning of the summer, our grandmother's health had improved, and she went home to Florida. But our dog became very weak, and we decided to put him down. We didn't know how to tell our mother-in-law, but she suddenly called herself and told an amazing story. It turns out that Buddy came to see her last night, as happened in Minnesota, and in the morning he was gone. My husband and I didn't know how to answer his mom's question. How is this possible? Am I going crazy? And here is another amazing case. Janice was told this story at the wedding of her husband's colleagues. The groom's sister approached her, who had just read the book and decided to share what had happened to her personally. Her grandfather needed good medical care. He had severe asthma and was in constant need of oxygen. He recently moved into a nursing home, and his granddaughter still hasn't been able to visit him. She had a strange dream last week. Grandpa was sitting on my bed, and he didn't have an oxygen tank with him. We left the room and found ourselves at a pond with a fountain surrounded by flowers. He told me not to worry, he was fine, and he would always look out for me. When I woke up, I was happy and calm. The phone rang. Of the nursing home informed me that Grandpa died in his sleep at night. One day after a lecture, a woman named Teresa approached Janice and told her that a similar incident had happened to her. One day, she woke up around midnight and remembered a dream she had just had. Her close friend Jane invited her to go shopping. She told me how Jane tried on a beautiful burgundy dress. She was so happy that she found the perfect dress for a future party. Then they went to the jewelry department and selected a small gold pendant. The dream ended. Teresa rolled over and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, she was informed that Jane had died of a heart attack at exactly midnight. Teresa was just devastated. During the farewell in the crematorium hall, the deceased friend turned out to be wearing the same burgundy dress and gold pendant that they bought in a dream. Such cases make it clear to us that communication with loved ones is not interrupted. Perhaps there is more to this than we can explain. Here's another story. The father of the family was in a very serious condition. His youngest daughter wanted to be on duty at his bedside, but he said, "No, you have to go to this conference." She obeyed. At 4 p.m., the woman was on a plane, constantly thinking about her father. Suddenly, the anxiety went away, and in its place came an inexplicable sense of peace. Calling the hospital after landing, she found out that it was at this time that her father died. Her older sister, who was thousands of miles away at the time, experienced something similar at the same time. The elevator she was riding in suddenly stopped between floors. The light started flashing, then went out completely. A few seconds later, the electricity came back on and the elevator moved on. Janice's close friend, oncologist Joan Borisenko, shared a fantastic story that happened at her friend's house. The boy was 3 years old when his sister was born in their family. Rob was a fairly developed child, and he constantly asked to be left alone with his newborn sister. The parents were confused by this request, but decided to comply with it. In order to avoid any trouble, a baby monitor was installed in the nursery. What they heard shocked them to the core. Their son whispered to his younger sister, "Tell me about paradise as soon as possible. I've lived here for so long that I've almost forgotten everything." Another story that Janice was told by a man named Patrick. He also turned to her after the lecture with a request to listen to his story. He was 68 years old when it happened. He almost missed his flight, so he had to run briskly through the airport building with a heavy bag in his hands. He managed to jump on the plane at the last minute. The flight attendant seated the late passenger, fastened her seatbelt, and brought a glass of water. Patrick's breath caught in his throat. He was sweating profusely, and then the pain in his chest began. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and immediately fell right into the middle of the aisle. At that very moment, he found himself under the ceiling of the plane. He watched everything that was happening and could hear the thoughts of everyone on that plane. All the passengers were worried. Then he began to see those who were praying for him. It was like rays of purple light that were rising up. The flight attendant brought a defibrillator, but she didn't know how to handle it at all. But then a large young man came up from economy class, said that he was a medic, and began to resuscitate. It lasted 7 minutes, but Patrick's spirit had already left the plane and found himself in a bright and beautiful hall. Everything here was filled with compassion and love. The events of his past life began to unfold in front of him. It looked like a fast-forward motion picture. He saw that tragic day and his death on the plane. After that, he was asked to look into the future if he decided to return to his body. Patrick made a choice and came to his senses. All these stories eloquently convey the truth. We can change our lives and make it more fulfilling. What you do in your earthly life will echo in eternity. When asked if she is afraid of death, Janice gives an unequivocal answer. No, not at all. My work is directly related to death. I have witnessed too much, which does not fit into the framework of official science. I know that death only opens the door to another world for us. Dear friends, write in the comments, how do you feel about these stories, and is it worth believing them? And please don't forget to like this video if you liked it. It motivates me a lot. By the way, recently on my channel, there were some interesting videos about doctors who told incredible things about the afterlife. You can watch them if you want. I thank you for watching and wish you all the best in this world. See you soon.